I'm Andre Dinesh, formerly of the Voice of America for 35 years, an AFSA member, and a former member of the AFSA Governing Board. I'm here today to interview my wife, Ellen Crosby, the author of 10 mysteries, including her most recent, The Champagne Conspiracy, which was published by St. Martin's Minotaur in November. Ellen, tell me about the Champagne Conspiracy.
Well, in the Champagne Conspiracy, Lucy Montgomery, who owns a small vineyard near Middleburg, Virginia, which is about 50 miles outside of Washington, D.C., and her winemaker, Quinn Santori, receive a visit from Gino Tomasi, who's California winemaking royalty and owns one of the biggest vineyards in the Napa Valley. He's also Quinn's estranged cousin, and he's being blackmailed by someone threatening to expose an old family secret surrounding the death of Quinn's great-grandmother, first wife, a Prohibition-era flapper who was having an affair with President Warren Harding. As Quinn and Lucy start digging into the past secrets, they soon find tangled connections to the present involving Lucy's family. And before long, they realize there's someone out there willing to commit murder now to keep a 100-year-old secret dead and buried.
What was the inspiration for this book?
Well, as you know, the book is set partly in Prohibition times, and so a couple of years ago, the American Museum of Natural History decided to invite a group of California winemakers to come and talk about what happened to the wine industry during Prohibition. And one of the winemakers who was invited was Michael Martini, who is the grandson of Louis Martini of Martini Vineyards. And the Martinis are friends of ours. They helped me with a previous book in the series. So when they came to town, we all decided to go out to dinner. And Michael talked a lot about what did happen to winemaking during Prohibition. You always think it's going to be booze and alcohol and speakeasies and that sort of thing. But the winemaking industry had a very interesting past in that a lot of the winemakers actually plowed their grapes under and planted vineyards or planted orchards. But a few of them kept their vineyards, and they ended up making sacramental wine for the Catholic Church. And they made a lot of sacramental wine. So I thought there was sort of an interesting nugget in there that tied to my series and the Virginia wine series. So that was kind of the inspiration.
Now, this is the 7th in the series. Do you have to read the others before you tackle the Champagne Conspiracy, or can you read it by itself?
Standalone?
Standalone.
I think every mystery author who writes a series, and many of us do, has to deal with that question. And the short answer is that you could read the book on its own, and it wouldn't really work if you had to go back and find the first 6 and read them. So for any of my fans who have read the first 6 books, the 7th will bring back a lot of familiar characters and a setting that they know. But for anybody who's new, hopefully I've done enough of introducing people so that you can get acquainted with who they are. So it's kind of a fine line between not having too much information for those who know you and having enough for those who are new to the series. But you can read it as a standalone.
Here's a question that intrigued me. Why did you wait 5 years between book 6 and 7?
Yeah, that is a good question. I have wonderful fans. I have smart fans. I have terrific fans. And one of the things when you write a mystery that's kind of a small town, kind of a cozier mystery, it's a small world. And as the books went along, and I never thought I'd be writing 7. I just actually finished the 8th. I thought I was going to write 1. So it was a small town. And as you get further into the series, it becomes harder to figure out who done it because you kind of already know who didn't done it. So I play fair with my readers. Lucy's never smarter than the police. She's not a scofflaw. She doesn't break into people's homes to find a clue. I have a friend at the Fairfax County Police Department who's a crime scene detective who I take out to lunch quite often, and he helps me with, well, what could the police miss, or why wouldn't they do this or that? So it's all plausible. But as I got into the 6th book, I just realized I was in a kind of a smaller and smaller corner, and I just needed to step away from it for a while and take a break. So I wrote 2 other books in the intervening 5 years in a different series. But I had a lot of requests, and my new publisher, Macmillan at St. Martin Minotaur, they loved the books too, so they said we want her to come back.
Now, is Lucy's Vineyard based on a real vineyard?
Lucy's Vineyard is based on a vineyard that used to exist and no longer does. So after you were posted to London and we came home and I knew I was going to be writing this book, I didn't know anything about the business of growing grapes and making wine. So I thought, as a former journalist, I have to do my homework. And so the kids were still in school, and I needed to be home in time for the school bus. So I got the ADC map of Northern Virginia out, and this was in the 90s. I needed to find a vineyard where I could get out to from our house in Fairfax County and home in time for the school bus. So I happened upon a vineyard in Middleburg, Virginia, just outside of Middleburg, called Swedenburg Estate Vineyard. And I stopped by and met the woman who owned it, who was actually another Foreign Service family, Juanita and Wayne Swedenburg. And she happened to like Murder, She Wrote, which was lucky for me because, you show up on someone's doorstep and say, I'd love to set a murder in your vineyard. Would you be willing to help me out? You don't always get somebody who opens the door and says, come on in. So Juanita was wonderful. She taught me so much about the day-to-day running of a vineyard, which I needed to know as part of the series. And actually, she passed away in 2007, and not only was she known in Virginia, she was nationally and internationally known because she was the woman who found out that it was against the law for her to ship her wine across state boundaries, and it got into a constitutional issue. And so she had cattle, and she said, well, I can ship my cattle to New York. Why can't I ship my wine to New York? So she sent her, with the Institute for Justice, they sued the state of New York, and they won, and the lawsuits kept going back and forth and getting bigger and bigger until it finally went to the Supreme Court. And it was a case of the Interstate Commerce Clause or the amendment to repeal prohibition, where the states were allowed to decide what they were going to do with their alcohol. So she made it a constitutional issue, and she won. So when she passed away, the Washington Post wrote about her, the Wall Street Journal wrote about her. Her family asked me to handle all of her obituary, all the press phone calls, because she was quite a celebrity.
Also an international celebrity.
Exactly,
A
exactly.
lot of the British papers picked up
Mm-hmm.
the story.
That's right. I remember you brought me home, The Economist.
The Economist, Financial Times.
Yeah. She was in People magazine, which drove her nuts because they printed her age, which she was in her late 80s. But Juanita Swedenburg was quite a lady, so I was very lucky.
Now the other books in the series are the Merlot Murders, the Chardonnay Charade, the Bordeaux Betrayal, the Riesling Retribution, the Viognier Vendetta, and the Sauvignon Secret. It begs the question, why the alliteration in the titles? Was that your idea?
Oh, yes. Actually, had I but known, I may not have called the first book The Merlot Murders, but it was a marketing decision by my publisher. The first 6 books were published by Scribner in hardcover and Pocket in paperback. And it was my editor from Pocket who called me when the second book was coming out and said, my dear, A is for Alibi, work for Sue Grafton, and One for the Money, work for Janet Ivanovich. You need something where people will remember the book. So you need to have a wine in every title, and you need to have, it needs to be alliterative, and that will be your gimmick or your thing. And so we kind of went from there. But it was definitely marketing, and I do take some teasing, and people have tried to rename future books. So I've heard a lot. I've heard them all.
I'm sure you
but
did.
yeah, they're pretty funny too. But yes, so that's the reason for the alliterative titles.
So what's next for you?
Next is I turned in the 8th book last week, The Vineyard Victims, and that will be out in a year from now in November 2017. And The Champagne Conspiracy, which is here, will be out in paperback at the end of August.
Where can we find more about you?
Oh, I'm everywhere. You can. I have a great website. I am everywhere. I have a great website. So EllenCrosby.com. I'm on Facebook at Ellen Crosby Books. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Pinterest. I have a great Instagram feed. I'm on Goodreads. So I can be found just about everywhere.
You've received some pretty nice reviews for the Champagne Conspiracy. Now let me just read some.
Thank you.
And USA Today called it funny, charming, and a superior cozy. Now Parade magazine called it a fun and satisfying read. And the Richmond Times-Dispatch called it a sparkling and heady whodunit. Congratulations on the winner.
Thank you. Thanks very much.